Hello. So in this class of cloud computing, today we will study here about the virtualization. That is, we will study here about the implementation stage of the migration process. That means the migration here from physical to virtualized environment. In the previous session here about this, we have studied about the various considerations that should be taken into account before this physical to virtualization uh, process takes place here. Now we will today in this class study about the migration process and the things which require to be considered after the migration process here. So the very first topic which we're going to study here is the implementation of your migration stage or implementation stage for your migration process. So we have here the migration process here, the migration from the physical to virtualized environment. So we have number of steps in these stages which we need to follow when this transition is taking place here. So the step one here is order incorrect hardware, or we can say the step one here is the correct hardware. Now if the existing servers and machines will be able to continue the work efficiently in the new virtualized environment. So first of all, you need to figure out here that what are the existing number of servers here and the machines, or are they able to continue that work efficiently in the new virtualized environment, because we need to perform that virtualization on those systems here. So in certain instances, what happens, a new hardware is required. That means new hardware is required in here in certain instances. So at that time, what you should do, you should determine the specifications for the new machines that you may require. So first of all, you should figure out that if the existing hardware is sufficient or not, then you need to figure out that either if new hardware is required, then you should determine the specifications of new hardware. Now this the it should be determined here. That means now you should have the correct order of your hardware, because what you need is to utilize the resources efficiently here. So now after that, what you need to do, you need to purchase these hardwares from a suitable vendor, and then you should compare the prices also. So best hardware solutions should be applied here, because we have to convert existing hardware configuration into a blade server. Now the blade servers are the one which can be easily added or removed according to the requirement. So for first step here in the migration is that you should consider about your hardware. Very first of all, you should check the existing hardware is compatible, it can run the applications, or if you require new hardware, then you should see the specifications and then you should purchase that particular hardware. Now, once you have the correct hardware here, the next step here in this migration process is to select your virtualization software here. So, the step 2 will be select your virtualization software. Select your virtualization software here. Now, Basically, when you're planning for this virtualization environment, this step is considered over there during the planning stage. Now, for example, you will not use the you will not select a virtualization application that only works on your Linux based operating system. If all of your servers were window based, that means you need to have there the correct virtualization software. Now, the selection here for this virtualization software is tricky, but certain factors here are important. That means, first of all, you should here also consider the price. How much does the software cost, or whether it is an open source? Then you should see the type. Type means whether it is a bare metal virtualization or it is a hosted one. That means here you need to figure out that whether this will be a bare metal or your hosted one. Now, next thing which you need to check, and that is very important, that is your compatibility. Now, if it is hosted, will it be able to run over the host that operating system which you are running? That means you have to check the compatibility level here. If it is hosted one, so will it be able to run within the host operating system's environment? After the compatibility issue, what you have to check? You have to check the hardware requirements. You need to check here the hardware requirements. So under this hardware requirements, what you need to check is that will the virtualization software run on this 86 your 8086 based system or not? So the virtualization software here is selected according to these factors. That means you have to check that it's an open source, or if it is not an open source software, how much it is costing, then the type, then the compatibility issues, and then the hardware requirements here. So that means using these factors you can select the appropriate virtualization software here. Now, after the correct hardware and after selecting the right virtualization software, what you have to do? The third step here is now you have to carry out the actual virtualization process here. You're ready with the hardware, you have the software there, the virtualization software. Now you're ready here for the virtualization process. You have to now carry out the actual virtualization process. Now, after above steps, what we can begin here with the conversion process from your with the using your P2V tool. So that means here comes in action your P2V tool, which is here your physical to virtual process. So this will be the tool which will be enabling here this transition. Now after this, what this conversion tool here will do? Now we will see here what it will do. So we are here with the third step of this migration process, where we have actually this P2V conversion. Now the very first step that this tool here will do is the conversion tool takes a snapshot of the existing system. It takes a snapshot of existing system. The snapshot data. Now the snapshot which you have collected, that is here encapsulated into a virtualized form. Now the next thing is that this snapshot data is encapsulated into a virtualized form. For example, the virtual machine files are created from the snapshot information. What we are doing, we are taking the snapshot. So what will happen? The virtual machine files, only the files, the virtual machine files here are created from the snapshot information, and all of the data from the snapshot is encapsulated into a virtual hard drive. So what you're doing, you're taking the snapshots, and then those virtual machines file are created from that. Now the data here that from the data here is encapsulated with or taken within the virtual hard drive. Now we have after this step, we have the virtualized files here. Now what will be the process after that? These virtualized files are then transferred over to the new hardware, or the existing data is overwritten. So simply what we are doing, that this virtualized files, or we can say that the virtualized data is transferred to new hardware. So that means over this hardware, if we have new hardware, what we are doing, we are creating these virtualized instances here. Now after that, the virtual machine is booted up while it is disconnected from the network. So we're just taking here the snapshots of the existing system. Then from the help of these snapshot data, we converting them into, or we're encapsulating them as a virtualized file. Now those virtualized files are transferred over to your new hardware. Now what we'll be doing, we will be booting up the virtual machine, but it will be disconnected from the network here. So the virtual machine is booted up, but, or we can say that while it is disconnected from network. From the network here. Now, after the virtual machine here is booted up, what's next? Now, that means here the testing here is done for the virtual machine. So, once the testing has been successfully completed, so or if there are some errors, so any setting or parameters that need to be changed here, that can be done at this time while it is disconnected from the network. We haven't connected here into the network. So if at this stage you need to modify certain parameters, you can modify them. So that means at the fifth step, what we can do, if any, or if 10 modifications are required, you're supposed to do them or implement them here. So finally, after that, what happens? The virtualization machines go live and is connected to the network. After the testing procedure is complete here, what will happen? At the last step, your virtual machine goes live here. So that means here the virtualization process or your migration has been completed. Old physical machines can be disconnected, and then your migration here is complete. So this is your physical to virtual migration here. That means we're just discussing here about this virtualization concept in your cloud computing. So that means we have this service model here, which is using here the concept of virtualization. That means this is providing here a network architecture, network infrastructure here for the process. So there you will be implementing virtualization. That means you will be providing the virtual machines here. So this is how this physical to virtualized transition will take place here. So these are the number of steps here which you need to do when this migration here is taking place. Now after that, we have here certain considerations after the migration. So we can say that certain considerations when this process here is going on, things which you need to consider. That means you have done the migration, or we can simply say that it's disconnected from the network. So there are certain considerations here which should be taken into account before the virtual machine goes live. So what do we have here? Now, first of all, you have to disable the unnecessary hardware within the virtualized environment. The very first thing which you need to consider is that disabling the unnecessary hardware within the virtualized environment. Now, for example, what happens when a physical machine is virtualized, it will have other hardware features also, such as the USB ports, the floppy disk drives, etc., enabled within its virtualized environment. So, if these hardware are not required any longer by the virtual machine, so they should be disabled because it will only free up the resources. So, that means whatever the unnecessary hardware here is, and that is not required here by the virtual machine, that should be here disabled. The next thing is starting up the virtual machine without connecting it to the network. We have started this step here also. That means certain testing here is done. So this is a very important thing here. That means you have to check here whether the virtual machine is working properly or not before making it a live resource. So next is starting up the virtual machine before it goes live or it is connected to the network here. So what happens when starting up a virtual machine for the very first time? Its network card should be disabled or its interface should not be connected to anything. When you're starting it here for the first time, what you should do, its interface card should be disabled. That means you should not connect it to the network. Now, why it is done? This is done here to test the stability of the virtual machine when it is running as a standalone machine. So this step here is done to check the stability of the virtual machine. So here it is done to check the stability of virtual machine here, that whether it is running as a standalone machine here or not. Now after that, when you have done this, next is you have to test critical or important applications. So third one here is testing of critical or your important applications here. Once a virtual machine has been loaded up, the important applications here should be briefly run and they should be tested to ensure that they are working properly or not. So that means before making it or connecting it to network, these are the things which you need to do here. Testing the critical important applications to check the working or we can say the stability of the various applications. Next step is rebooting virtual machine multiple times. Rebooting the virtual machine multiple times here. Now, to ensure that all the logs are clean after the migration is done. That means here you have to check that all the logs are clean after the migration process. Now, what you should do to ensure that the machine is able, you have to check here that the machine here is able to warm boot and cold boot. That means here you are checking the warm booting and the cold booting of the system. The warm boot basically refers to the rebooting after being switched on, and for cold booting it's the booting up after it's being switched off. So you have to ensure this thing also. Now the very last step here or with the last consideration here is that check and configure the server parameters. That means check, last step here is to check the server parameters. Now, the final step before going live involves checking the network settings. So this basically involves here checking the server parameters means checking the settings of the network. That means the IP address configuration or the subnet mask information. So these should be checked here. Now testing all those things. So that means if any changes are required, they should be made at this stage, because here we have not connected it to the any network. It's not a live machine here. So you should consider all those things, and if any change is required, that should be done at this stage. So you have to check the unnecessary hardware, then uh, you have to check the stability of the virtual machines, testing important applications, rebooting the virtual machines, and then checking the server parameters here. So here in this class, we have studied about the migration process of this physical to virtual environment and the various considerations of your migration process. So this is all here for today's class. Thank you so much.